Well, we started last year with on the podcast with stories of plane crashes,
Yes.
and aviation mishaps, and there was another major one that happened not in Australia but in our neck of the woods. So Adam,
Yeah.
you were across this
Yes.
much more than I was.
So this was this was on the Sunday after Christmas, and so obviously this was in South Korea. I'm sure everybody heard about it. It was the biggest story in the world for a couple of days. So for those of you unaware, a 737-800 flown by Jeju Air, which is a kind of low-cost carrier in South Korea. It was approaching into land at, is it Muan Airport in South Korea? I think I've said this correct. Was coming into land and was given by air traffic control a warning that there were birds in the area. We think there was then a bird strike. We don't know for sure. A minute after that warning, a mayday call was issued. The aircraft kind of made one approach to land and then aborted that approach, kind of turned around and came towards the runway the opposite way. For reasons that we don't know yet, the aircraft was unable to lower its landing gear and also lower its flaps, which obviously are kind of like brakes, would have slowed it down. And what happened is it landed kind of halfway, roughly, on the runway. And it actually did a kind of they would call it like a belly flop or a belly landing. It did a perfect belly landing and kind of skidded along the runway and then skid kind of towards the end of the runway, still going very fast. It then kind of collided into, I say, a wall or a structure that was kind of hosting the instrument landing equipment, which is kind of used by air traffic control essentially to help guide the aircraft down. And once it hit this structure, the aircraft blew up into a huge fireball. Of the 181, I think, people on board, very sadly, only 2 people survived, which were 2 members of the crew who happened to be sat near the tail of the aircraft. Obviously, this is a major kind of aviation disaster. Particularly the South Korean authorities have reacted very strongly to this. There's a kind of a full police investigation they are currently examining. They've done a raid on the airport. They're looking into the carrier itself. From the outside, it just appears to be a tragic accident. One of those things. The 737-800 is not the 737 MAX. This is an aircraft that's been going for a long, long time, has a very good safety record. But nonetheless, there's a lot of kind of speculation as to kind of what went wrong and why. So we're fairly certain there was a bird strike. So birds essentially went into one of the engines, potentially shutting it down. What we don't know is why that would have caused the aircraft to not be able to lower the landing gear and not be able to lower the flaps, because that's the thing that would have made all of the difference. So why, it seems like an extraordinary coincidence that you could have almost 2 things happen. The other thing that really has drawn a lot of attention is why this structure was near the end or the start of the runway. So technically speaking, it was put within the kind of the international requirements for the distance away from the runway. But as a lot of experts have said, a sort of structure like this is very unusual. And why would you put it anywhere near the end of the runway itself? Certainly, if you're looking at it, it looks like the aircraft would have stopped almost without a single casualty if it hadn't have been for that. When you watch the video, which is a very distressing thing to watch, it does appear that the pilot, that the crew on board, made a pretty much textbook emergency landing. It looked like they did a very, very, very good job. So that's why this investigation is ongoing. As I say, the South Korean authorities are taking a very, very serious look at this. I say in most countries, but usually when you have an incident like this, it's very sad and things carry on. But there certainly is. It feels like in South Korea, they want answers. Not necessarily they want someone to blame, but they want to get to the bottom of this. I don't think we will have answers for this for quite a long time. They have recovered 2 of the kind of black boxes, one of which I think was kind of partially damaged, is being sent off to the US for analysis. But with these things in the media, the mainstream media get very interested in, it will take years before we find out. So our equivalent kind of air traffic or air transport investigating sort of organisation in Australia is the ATSB. They are the best of the best. I think they're world renowned as being one of the top ones in the world. But when they do things, their investigations, they almost take minimum kind of a year, 18 months. You might get a preliminary one. And when they look at these things, it's so much more in detail than people think, because Obviously, they have to look at the mechanics of the aircraft. They have to study the kind of the flight path. They have to see, what footage exists of that aircraft coming down. What data can they take from that? They'll obviously listen to any kind of recordings in the cockpit. They also have to consider human factors as well. They have to consider the kind of the panic of the situation, how people would react, and a million other things. So the people that work on these are incredibly talented. It's a forensic investigation. Often what happens with these things is there's no one particular reason. Often it's a number of reasons that come together. And particularly with the ATSB, and I'm not sure exactly how it works in South Korea. In the ATSB, they have this idea of almost like a no-blame investigation, that when they go into it, they're not necessarily trying to find people guilty or innocent. They're simply trying to establish the most likely course of events of what happened. And particularly in Australia, the ATSB, in their reports, they don't actually name anybody. They might refer to their position within the team, but they don't name anybody. I think in reality, we're going to be waiting 18 months, 2 years or so. Even though everybody wants to find one person to blame, the likelihood is that at some point this was a tragic accident. Perhaps lessons could be learned.
There could also have been maybe some systemic issues at play.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm looking at this New York Times article. This is not going to be good news for Jeju Air, which was already apparently heavy with debt and near record lows in stock. And it's being threatened by a merger between Korean Air and Asiana. So it's going to be rough going. It is the sort of the biggest low-cost carrier in South Korea, but this is going to add to its troubles. On the subject of the ATSB, by the way, there's been an interesting discussion raised following the crash of a light aircraft off Coffs Harbour over the weekend. These two experienced flight instructors were killed when I believe it was a Sting S4 plummeted into the ocean. The ATSB was sort of asked, we asked them and media have asked them, are you going to investigate this? And what the ATSB has said was, no, it's on the recreational register. That's not part of our remit. If it's registered as a recreational aircraft, the ATSB, doesn't have to get involved. And what the Recreational Aviation Australia and other local people in the area have been saying was, well, why not? Why can't the ATSB investigate this? The ATSB should be investigating this. They have the facilities to investigate this that other organizations like RAOs don't.
And this has come up before, but the problem is obviously they have a remit of what they are and they aren't allowed to get involved in. And obviously that costs money, that costs time. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be doing it, but it's more that the question is, do you expand that remit? But yeah, this does happen, every so often.